Welcome to the AI Corner. I'm Mike Bailey, here to spotlight the people shaping New Zealand's AI future. In today's episode, we're speaking with John Daniel Trask, or otherwise known as JD. JD is CEO at both Raygun and AutoHive out of Wellington. In particular, AutoHive uses AI agents to automate routine tasks, and his mission is to bring scalable AI delegation to businesses across ANZ. Welcome to the pod, JD.
Thanks so much for having me, Mike. I'm really excited to be here, and I'm so stoked you're putting together this podcast for everyone in New Zealand.
I appreciate it. Thank you for the kind words. So I suppose before we talk about AutoHive, what first got you interested in AI? Was there a moment or a project that really pulled you in?
Yeah, so I mean, I've been a huge nerd since I was a little kid, to be honest. And this might sound, one of those comments you shouldn't make on a podcast, but as a teenager, when there was this TV show called Weird Science. And in Weird Science, these two teenage boys make this artificial intelligent, I guess you'd call her a girlfriend, but the plot goes that she couldn't do any of the interesting stuff, but she was a digital life form. And so, this notion of AI and sci-fi and all these things have sort of been on the periphery of computing that entire time. And so I've always had a bit of an interest in where does AI kind of go? How much more can these systems do? And we've seen sort of smart systems. I mean, again, showing my age, I remember playing with something called the Microsoft Agents framework in about 1998 that could be deployed, I think, onto Windows 98 with these little avatars, kind of like Clippy. So I've been kind of keeping an eye on it. But when it came to the ChatGPT moment, and seeing a really sort of somewhat sense of creative response or giving the sense of some form of thinking or intelligence, that was my sort of, I won't use the actual word here, but it's my like holy moly, my OF moment, of AI. And I think everybody has that moment. For me, it was seeing ChatGPT, when it sort of first properly dropped there, and I kind of was like, oh, the world sort of changed here. And I still think a lot of us that are builders of software are still grappling a little bit with the idea of sort of an abstract intelligence and how do you apply that in an effective way. I mean, we're still a very long way from the weird science idea, but we're a lot closer than we were, which is kind of an interesting thing to live through.
Yeah, I can imagine. And as you say, it's for people who know how to build software, it's almost amazing because it pours gasoline on the skill set you already had, in terms of accelerating what you can do. And then for those of us that aren't technical, we're able to now build fast and ship product. And it more becomes about taste sometimes. It's not just about how good you are technically, but how fast can you spin up an MVP, go and raise capital perhaps, or at least get it to market. And then you start to think through what is the moat that you build around your business. Is it the technical capabilities around your product, or is it around distribution, brand, those sorts of elements, which create a whole new generation and a whole new opportunity in the market for those that aren't perhaps classically trained on code or other areas of.
Yeah, I mean, and a little closer to home, let's just cut to the bone on it. Like New Zealand has a huge productivity problem, right? Like we've talked about this for decades down here, and I see AI as this productivity super weapon that's sort of been developed. And I'd love to see more New Zealand businesses and more New Zealanders in general sort of getting behind what this is enabling, because it addresses one of our core problems. At the same time, as you note, at the moment, AI is very much the realm of software. Obviously, the robots are coming, but they're going to have a little bit of a lag factor. And I've long sort of felt for New Zealand that software, I always keep hearing the government doesn't want to pick winners. We don't want to pick winners. We want to support everybody. And it's like, well, there is very few industries that pay as highly as software that can be transmitted to the other side of the world in milliseconds, that don't really incur any tariff costs, that, they play to all the advantages of actually being a small island nation at the bottom of nowhere. So I've long been disappointed that we don't sort of go, hey, let's solve our productivity issues. Let's move up that value chain with software. Let's not lean into our weaknesses of trying to ship things physically, and all of that. And so that's a little bit about how I've shaped even my career in New Zealand, is how do we sort of play to all of those strengths and try to avoid the weaknesses. And so I think we've got this great opportunity right now for New Zealand to really put its foot down on this stuff if it wants to.
And what's the word on the street with people that you talk to with this type of theory? Do you find others are getting on board with this type of approach and mentality of where we can go as a country?
We've kind of got our head in the sand a little bit with our national conversation at the very least. And we should be leveling that up and having productive conversations. So to be honest, no, the man on the street seems to be well away from what AI is doing. And so in some ways, let's be candid. This is the risk because I mean, I gyrate between a high level of concern and a high level of excitement about what AI is going to bring. And when you have an economy that has built a substantial number of not wildly specialized roles, I worry that people aren't talking about what's about to come. And I think that could be quite a large employment disruption. And I'm surprised we're not talking more about that and what's coming. We obviously have the emergence of some employment issues now, and I worry it's only going to get worse in New Zealand.
We could spend hours talking on this topic, couldn't we? But let's move on to AutoHive and Raygun. But fascinating to hear your perspective. So, what sparked the journey for you from Raygun into AutoHive?
Yeah, so it's probably important to understand first what Raygun is. So Raygun provides development tools. So we monitor software for other companies. We're 93% export based, so we pull a lot more money into New Zealand than we spend overseas. And we're used by some of the world's largest businesses. So we process billions and billions of data points for our customers every single month, helping them identify faults in their software, how to make it faster, and how to make it better. So when the AI sort of wave began around the end of 2022, we had our annual planning with the team as we do around April. And at this point, we had ChatGPT was available. We'd sort of started to look at that. I actually felt really uncomfortable because normally I go into these annual planning meetings kind of going, this is kind of the direction I want to take the company over the next 12 months. And I see those sessions as enrolling the team in that vision for the future, as well as sculpting that vision a little bit based on everybody's sort of input. And that year I kind of went in there going, I don't really know what we should do in the next 12 months because all I know is that the world has changed and it's changed substantially. And so again, you've probably pick up as a theme here as a giant nerd as a kid, I was spending a lot of time reading about Microsoft, Apple, how these companies were built, how the software industry was growing, and all of these sorts of things. And so I had a really good memory of the internet tidal wave memo where Bill Gates basically issued a memo to all of Microsoft saying, hey, we've got to turn the boat around. We are going to lose if we don't go all in on this internet thing that's turned up. And I like to, you look like a young man there, Mike. So, I'll give some color for the younger listeners, which is, Microsoft in the late 90s. Imagine if you woke up today and you heard that Google, Meta, Amazon, Microsoft, and Apple were all merging into one company. You'd be like, wow, that company is way too powerful. That was basically Microsoft in the 90s, right? They were the software industry. They were, if they did anything, it was terrifying in that industry. Like it's almost hard to overstate how powerful Microsoft was in the 90s. And so when you see a company like that going, oh, shoot, if we don't adapt right now, we're going to die. That was this big, big monumental moment. And so I actually felt a little bit, and I talked our team through this. I was like, I think we're at another internet tidal wave moment where it's like, if you do not sort of start turning your ship, especially if your ship is big, you're going to be just left in the dust. And so we ended up having this great conversation. We demonstrated a lot of this AI tech, and then we spent the next year building agents. And we ran this AI week about a month after that all hands, where we stopped the entire company's work for a week, with the exception of answering customer support, because no customer wants to be left in the lurch. And we had everybody here spend the first 4 hours of Monday doing our engineering onboarding tests. So, the test we would give to people if they wanted to join as an engineer. And, to be blunt, I like to think Raygun has some of the most top quality engineering cultures in all of New Zealand business. So it's not an easy test. And so when suddenly everybody in the company could pass the test, even if they'd never written a single line of code, this was this like, oh my goodness. And to a degree, I think of AI in that way, is that it's death to the value of expertise. And that might be controversial to some people, because I have noticed that generally talking about AI is everybody can see how it affects everybody else. But oh no, me, I've got this special X factor, this thing that AI cannot possibly bring to the table. And, I I've been sort of thinking of it as observing people going through their stages of grief, where it's like, oh, you're in the denial phase, right? You'll get there. We also are pushing really hard on that usability side. I'm sure the people that are listening to this podcast, I'm sure some of them even think that they're a little bit behind. The fact you're listening to this podcast doesn't mean you're behind. It means you're ahead. And there's a vast number of people who aren't even there yet. And so when those folks sort of start coming online with AI, I think they need a better journey than what the current tool set kind of offers.
Awesome. Love the story. Also, very much enjoying the history lesson. I didn't quite understand the Microsoft story back there, so that's great. In terms of, I do think some of the best businesses are born out of solving your own problems, right? And it sounds as though you've taken that path on. And how has that journey been for you and the company?
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of fun. It can be stressful at times because one of the things with AI is obviously it's not perfect. And so there has to be some trust and you have to make space for testing and training. And I talk a lot about this. I've been invited in to talk to various organizations, and my first sort of point of call is to try and make AI fun. And what do I mean by that? It's like, well, again, drawing on sort of analogies, a lot of young people got told they were awesome at computers when really they were just fearless of technology, and so they were okay to sort of make mistakes. The number of times I recall bricking the family computer and being mortified because I had to go into the shop, and did I do that more than my parents? Yes, but at the same time, that's how I learned how to use the computer and what not to do. And so you've got to create these environments where people are free to play. And I actually think things like when we've seen the image generation stuff going a bit silly online and stuff like that, that's how you make it safe. A fun space is typically a safe space in order to experiment. And so I encourage that. And I'll give you a small example that was a bit silly here, but one of our team members, she's absolutely awesome. Her name's Maddie. She's moved to the UK. And she's still working with Raygun and AutoHive, but she's such a big personality that one of the teammates made the Maddie bot agent that exists now in our Slack, so that we wouldn't miss her too much while she was traveling. And this bot does some funny things. For example, Maddie likes to wind up one of the engineers here, so the bot sort of publicly roasts one of the engineers about once a week and all of that. And it was just silly. It was really silly and really fun. And it was one of those things where, you sort of sit there as the CEO and you're like, okay, how close are we to an HR disaster here? But also you sit there kind of going, look, if people are going to have fun and play with this stuff, they're learning. And that's what you really want to do. You don't want to kind of start off with something super serious that's high risk that they don't want to do wrong in there. So that's been part of the journey, is just kind of continually talking about it. And I'll be honest, we've had some folks in the business, especially over the earlier parts of the couple of years I've sort of talked about, that were really not a fan of AI, and that they didn't want to be in a business that was trying to push this. And we can kind of get to this as a topic, but what I've found interesting is it would alienate some folks, and so they'd leave. And the transition that I've seen happen now is that we're now getting people wanting to apply purely because they're frustrated that their companies don't get AI, and they feel like they are going to find themselves obsolete if their own leadership doesn't get on board and figure out what's going on here. So they're now looking to just, sometimes happy where they're working, otherwise just looking for those opportunities to work where they're going to be upskilled and find out how to use these skills.
Agreed. I think we'll see a lot of, moving of the chessboard pieces, so to speak, within organizations as some organizations, get on board. And the key point that, or through line that I'm hearing from you is just to keep moving forward. And part of what we talk about internally is just experiment. It doesn't always have to generate an ROI, but we just need to be moving forward and building and understanding how this is going to perhaps disrupt our customers' world, but also more importantly, our own world, because we don't want to be left behind. No one knows the future. No one has a crystal ball as to how this is going to play out, but we all need to be, as you say, getting our heads out of the sand and actually trying to understand what is going to impact our own businesses. I suppose you talk about AI agents, and just for a second, AI agents get thrown around by a lot of people and quite loosely, I would say. Like as a society, we haven't landed on a shared definition of what an AI agent is, its nuances. How do you define it in your world?
Yeah, so it's a really good point. So let's take a step back a little bit to sort of define what an agent is not. A lot of people, we started with ChatGPT, and I think that was a brilliant move because it really was the substitute for Google. I mean, what was it doing? It was loaded up with knowledge. So if you asked, it really saved you having to click through those links and synthesize the answer yourself. It just gave you the answer. That's a pretty much text in, text out. You're beginning and you're done. Even if you start looking at those deep research agents, they're pretty prescriptive. My view of an agent is something that is more responsive to the real world environment around it, and it composes plans by itself and it executes those plans with tools. So what we're about to see in the next step with agents is the explosion of tool use. So, for those of you who aren't familiar with what this means, an LLM or large language model can be given quote unquote tools, and if it's trained in the right way, it can suggest when those tools should be run. So it could be things like you give it a tool. One you'll all understand is search. So we already see these ones in ChatGPT. If I don't really know the answer, or you're asking me a question about what happened today that clearly wasn't in my training set, I think it would be a smart move if I go and do a Google search and I see what's happened today and I synthesize those results. So that's like the early innings of tool use. And so in my own experiments, the example I have that's the closest to what I kind of think of as a fully agentic system is I have an agent I've built at home. I call it Auto, and it's armed with very generic tools. So it can request data from the internet, as in download anything. It can run things in the terminal on my computer. It can browse the whole file system. It can read files, do those sorts of things. But none of those tasks or those tools that it's got are highly prescribed. They're like, do whatever you want with the file system, do whatever you want with the terminal, do whatever you want on the internet. And so then you can make these requests to this agent. And you might say something like, I'd like you to organize my downloads folder, delete the things that are clearly short term, and organize the others into categories or something like that. And that might be your whole request. And you want that system to then go, okay, the users asked me to do this. Given these tools, I would sort of put together this sort of plan. And then I'm going to execute on that plan. I'm going to undertake these things. And also, if something goes wrong, I'm going to be intelligent enough to kind of go, oh, I couldn't delete that file because it's in use. All right. Well, what might I do to unlock that file? And so it sort of takes these actions that affect the real world on your behalf, as opposed to a text in, text out. I don't kind of go to the crazy lengths of trying to get to a scientific definition of an agent. My sense is when it starts affecting the real world autonomously around you, that's kind of what I mean by an agent. I think that the step that'll really make the agents feel next level, however, and this is something that we are exploring ourselves, is how do you create an agent that starts to feel like it's extremely proactive on your behalf? So we start with, I have a request. And that's cool and all, but how do you get to the point where, I'm a huge fan of Iron Man. This probably plugs into your question of how into AI are you? I was trying to build Jarvis, like after I saw Iron Man 1. And one of the things that's really impressive about Jarvis is Jarvis is sort of reacting to the real world sometimes without being prompted to warn and alert Tony or bring in new information that's going to support him. I think that layer of agentic technology kind of comes next, but I don't think it means that before you get there that they're not really agents. They're acting on your behalf and affecting the real world.
I think you've defined it really well. There's almost three areas that I see an agent possessing, like very good at complex decision making. They can
Hmm.
manage difficult to maintain business rules or logic, and then they have an ability to understand unstructured data, which typically an AI kind of workflow or just an automation workflow would really struggle with. I take your point certainly on the future of agentic AI. It's almost as if when agents become strong and smart, they'll be able to generate and pursue their own goals, which might seem scary, but at the same time, we need sub goals as part of the broader objective for the agent to begin to make its own decisions. And they can start to exhibit and operate autonomously in more dynamic real world environments and basically able to adapt their plans over time without human prompts. As you say, I don't think we're there yet. We're still in that world of an agent in most people's eyes is basically an N8N type workflow
Hmm.
apps with a different UI with some agentic parts to the workflow, but at the end of the day, it's still being handed off from one node to another within that system, which isn't true agency in my mind as a broader definition, not even in just a technology definition.
Yeah, I would agree with that observation. I also break it down into I think we solved determinism, really well with computing, and AI in a way simply offers us indeterminism, which was really hard to do reliably, with a computer previously. It's also why I think that they're cheap shots when we sort of say things like, "Oh, but they can't do math very well." And to be fair, by the time of we're recording this, they're actually getting pretty damn good at maths too. But in my mind, it's like, well, you just give it the tool of the calculator. We already have solved a determinism. Let it use a computer the way a computer was designed to use, and it will give you the right mathematical result. We don't have to, we kind of got into that silver bullet zone where it's like, it should just do everything perfectly. And it's like, well, nobody can do anything perfectly. We use calculators, to help here because we're not very deterministic ourselves. And so I see that. And even on the workflow stuff, look, my personal view is, and it's what we're talking to with our own team, is it's like today the human being will be the primary user of the workflow when they have a flow that they want to either just design themselves because they want to design it themselves, or there's something where determinism is really important. Let's say it was an approval process. We said, hey, we want this agent to be able to publish blog posts for us automatically, but I want it to get approval from my head of marketing and my head of content, let's just say. Maybe at today's level of AI, I don't want to rely on the agent being smart enough to follow those steps because it very well might not. So I might want to have it so it says, well, actually, once you've done your work, run the workflow called approval process. And that actually becomes, yes, I can confirm that this happened. But I think you fast forward another 18 to 24 months, and the primary user of the workflows, I think, becomes the AI, and the human being stops making workflows. It's actually the planning tool for the AI. So it starts going, well, actually, this is how I think I'm going to solve this problem. I'm going to break it down, and then the human being might simply review, if they care, what that plan is visually. And I think that's nicer than reading it. So I think I'm a big fan of N8N, but at the same time, they're a 2019 workflow product that's bolted on AI capabilities. And I kind of believe that we have two sets of software. There's AI sprinkles where you've added some AI features, and that's the sort of stuff we're absolutely doing at Raygun. We have things like AI error resolution that helps our customers automatically fix bugs. But then you want to have a product that's thought from first principles ground up. How would AI build? Like, how would we build this in the age of AI? That this will be a super cycle that will dwarf the internet. I think it's going to be absolutely massive.
You're certainly taking on the first mover advantage approach in New Zealand, so well done. And to your point around the approvals piece and having a human in the mix, recently listened to a conversation about designing friction into AI systems, which is still going to be a necessity. And because we believe, or there's a perception out there that AI should do a bunch of the job or the work, which is quite a scary thought to a lot. But input from humans is necessary at different points to make sure that the right checks and balances are being maintained. And a really strong use case we heard was it's basically a helpline for children in Australia. And previously, the caller would take the call, they would have to type up the notes. They would then submit the notes into their system. They would take the next call. And their ability to take calls was maybe 15 an hour or so, maybe 10 an hour. And then with AI, they're now able to transcribe those calls automatically, upload into the system, and then jump onto the next call with less human input, meaning they completely doubled the amount of calls they could take, which was great to get more kids support that they need. But what they found was those cases or the information in the system wasn't being transcribed accurately. AI was making its own decision on what it meant, the interpretation of sentiment, etc. So you need to build friction into that process for the human to have some check and balance to say, actually, this isn't what the child was really meaning when they said X, Y, and Z. This is how they really felt. This is the next course of action we should take as a result. So that additional user or agent or human in the loop is going to be really important to make sure we are getting the right results without making it so deterministic that we're almost unraveling the benefit that the technology almost provides. I suppose when you think about the future formation of teams in an age of AI where agents are becoming more prominent, what does that look like? Like we've talked about the role that AI agents will play as part of workflows, but how does that impact team members and humans in the process? What do you think future businesses will look like? Will they get smaller as a result? Will we see more businesses proliferate because of that?
It's a great question. And I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but I think that there's going to be challenges. The way we're framing agents ourselves is that it's about delegating the toil, delegating the parts of the job you don't like. And that, to be honest, has been the million-dollar question to have anybody like on our early adopters with AutoHive has been to sort of say, well, if you like basically what's the job that takes you longer than an hour every week or every month that you just hate doing? You ask that question and everybody can rattle off like six things immediately. They're like, I hate this part, this part, this part. If that was just done for me, it's like, right, start there. Just automate that out. Help yourself that way. So I think we're going to see this sort of nibbling at the edges, in the beginning, in there. I do think that you don't need the headcount. I think, frankly, this was more of a business podcast. I'm usually the one out there arguing that most headcounts are wildly inflated in the world. I think more people are on UBI than we realize, and so I think that is going to probably get a bit crunchy as some of those roles are not necessary. That will be affected. That's where I think being AI native is really important because if you can spin these systems and get them operating really well, I don't think you got any problem. I think you'll be fine. So I do think that businesses will get smaller. My current thesis is that the ideal headcount is probably somewhere around 20. I know there's a lot of people talking about the idea of, the one person billion-dollar company, but the reality is people get sick. You want time out. Humans can't operate 24/7. And to be honest, I think the idea of running a large business completely autonomously by yourself is probably quite far away. And if you did it sooner, your quality of life, even if it was a billion-dollar business, might suck pretty bad. I think you do want a team. I think the people that are at the biggest risk, and to be again probably a little bit too truthful here, is you're really in trouble if you're in a giant company. And we're starting to see this come into these companies with hundreds of thousands of employees, right? Now, I don't know, the ins and outs of the recent, say, the Microsoft layoffs, but you've seen 7,000 people get let go in one day, and the narrative seemed to be like we've got too many managers and too many layers in here, and we're going to take them out. And that's where it's like, well, you might have thought that, and people are rightly sort of saying, hey, but Microsoft's this wildly profitable company. Why does it have to do that? And it's like, well, unfortunately, the business doesn't exist for the comfort of the staff. The business exists to provide value to its consumers and a return to its shareholders, which, to be fair, is mostly still, all of us who have retirement accounts want to grow that. And so when you've got these companies, like we were doing a bit of back of the envelope maths, and it's like, well, the Microsoft layoffs are probably worth about $1.4 billion a year in saved expense. These companies are going to keep making that calculation every year. So they're going to say, well, hang on a minute, we have this technology that's now doing this for a few, thousands of dollars. So I think that there's real risk if you're in a very large organization, especially if it's not protected by some level of regulatory capture. So you're seeing a lot of that going on. I think you want to figure out how you can be accelerating your output by leveraging AI yourself, so that you can show the value you're providing. I mean, even within Raygun, I said to our board 2 years ago, I was like, I don't know why I would really hire anybody going forward, and basically I didn't. I had the headcount come down. It wasn't driven by financial drivers. And we have various metrics for measuring productivity. And it might sound really harsh, but the productivity curve has been going like this, while the headcount has just been natural attrition over time. And we are making some hires for our new business, obviously, but the writing is on the wall. I can see the data. I have people telling me every day, like, oh no, you're wrong on this. And I'm like, I can literally see my numbers. Like, I run the company. I see how this operates. You are simply wrong if you think that this is not happening. And the longer you think it is not happening, the less time you're giving yourself to prepare. And so that's a concern. I also just, you mentioned the history lesson. Let's rewind the clock even further. I really love reading biographies, especially around business. And, I remember reading there's one book, it's really great. It's called The First Tycoon, the story of Cornelius Vanderbilt. And he built some of the biggest shipping companies in the world, and was based in New York, and sort of got the train lines and everything like that going. And he really actually saw the future coming. But the thing that was super fascinating about reading these biographies is that you realize that the age of the large company is only really about 200 years old. So it used to actually be that almost everybody was running a small business. If you didn't have a job, you didn't kind of go, gosh, somebody should really hire me and find me a job. You started a small business. You said, what can I provide to society that somebody will pay me for? Rather than expecting somebody else to do it. And I kind of have this idea that we simply might be kind of going back to smaller organizations where the headcount of people is not at all tied to the level of output or customers that they support or revenue. And so what we just think is very normal today, bigger company, more headcount, that equals good. I just think that might have been a blip.
I agree. I think we're seeing a natural reversal, which is a stark reality for some, and perhaps your message in particular is a wake-up call that a lot of people need to start to think about how do they make themselves, how do they future-proof their career and make themselves not, uh, you know, dispensable at the end of the day. And that comes from taking the time to play with these tools, join a company where it's an AI forward organization, and beginning to immerse yourself in this space, which is not going away. So there's
Mm.
a lot that people need to take on board. And what do you feel that the government or those that are thought leaders within this country should be doing to push this forward?
Yeah. Before we get to the government point, though, I want to hit on a point, which is just to say I fully appreciate how deeply concerning some of that narrative is, and the bit that I think causes me a little bit of stress around wanting more people to figure this out sooner is I think that even if we stopped innovating in AI today, like if the models were only as good as they were today, you're still going to transform the entire way society operates. The thing that is slow is the human adoption part. It's not the innovation. And so I often draw this parallel where it's like if you know the term fast takeoff, which is basically, if you've watched Terminator, it's that you invent AI, it quickly goes through all your computers, it works out humans are the threats, and it starts nuking you within like 3 minutes of coming online, right? That's the idea of, oh, it took off so quick that we didn't get an opportunity. Like we were roadkill. I actually think we are in a form of fast takeoff, but we've watched too many Terminator movies that we think it's about nuking ourselves. And I actually think we're in an innovation, almost vertical takeoff right now. So, you know, the Google event is literally on while you and I are talking. I am going to guarantee that there will be a new model announced or capability this week that will make the model that came out 2 weeks ago, that was 20% better than the model that came out 2 weeks before it, is going to come out. Like the rate of innovation is just bananas.
Mm.
What is really slow is human adoption. So that's a really low linear line. That is the only thing that is stopping this from absolutely ravaging, the current world right now. I make the reference, to COVID, and you might be thinking, okay, how do we reference COVID in this? It kind of blew my mind. I get that we were all forced to be at home, but did you see like the e-commerce jump? And it was like, oh, e-commerce, like fast forward 5 years, and you're like, we've had e-commerce for a quarter of a century, and there's people that are still like not on the boat yet.
Mm.
And so that's kind of quite telling about just what the rate of adoption for humans actually is. And it's pretty slow. That's probably, one of our weaknesses here. So now let's jump to the government. What can they do? Well, firstly, sort of unfortunately, I have a huge concern here because I can't think of a group of people less optimized to handling such a change as a government. Like it. Firstly, I mean, most of the people by definition, governments are slow, bureaucratic. They're not typically there to move quickly. And my concern is that some of these things could happen quite quickly. I can see us, New Zealand already has some unemployment issues going on, and I can see those numbers just getting worse and worse, as they go. We're having political conversations. I mean, again, I don't want to turn this into a political podcast, but as you're aware, the current government sort of said, hey, we're going to dial up how much we're teaching maths, and these core skills. I have a 6-year-old, so I go to parent-teacher interviews, and it's like there's resistance to the fact we won't even teach kids about about maths more, and it's like, what is going on here? We are stuck looking this way. So this is probably a little bit naughty of me, but I've been teaching my 6-year-old. I said, you go in, you ask your teacher, Miss, how does a large language model work? Right? Knowing full well there's no chance that the teacher knows how it works. But I'm like, this is my grassroots way to be like, I need my kid to understand this. I have Henry talking to the AI, several times a week. I talk to him about how we're using it. I show him using Cursor. I'm explaining to him when he was 4, I taught him some Minecraft. And I said, okay, buddy, when you can type the letters yourself, I will help you make a Minecraft mod. And like he is so excited about this idea of making a Minecraft mod that it's like, okay, a reason to learn to read now, and write. And to be honest, I said to him the other day, I was like, I think actually I'm going to end up teaching you how to prompt your way to a Minecraft mod. We're not even going to have to learn to program here. You're going to say, I want it to have Pokemon in it and I want it to have this. And he's going to make that. So I'm doing everything I can to try and like take my child on this journey around AI and all of that sort of stuff. Because, at 6, I don't think he's going to university in 15 years. Let me put it that way. Like I think there's so much stuff is going to change. It will just be crazy. And yet I don't think we're trying very hard with our education system. I don't think our government is doing much. I will acknowledge ACT, actually. I realize a lot of people in the tech industry are very left sort of aligned, so they might hate the ACT party. But they are the ones that are actually raising things like saying, hey, digital deepfakes are way too easy to make now. We should have laws that say, I can't take a photo of you, Mike, and go and do nefarious things with that just because it's easy to do now. And, I remember talking about deepfakes with the rector at Palmerston North Boys High, where I went to high school about 10 years ago, sort of saying, the next layer of bullying and things that are going to come into schools, when we can do reliable deepfakes in 1 second on our cell phone, the bullying problem is going to go just stratospheric. So I worry about all of these sorts of things. Both, are we getting ourselves ready? Are we protecting ourselves from things? And, my biggest concern is that the current narrative, as I say, in the country is probably just going to be like, our answer to AI is probably how do we just tax rich people more, and it's like, well, that ain't going to fix it, guys. We've got to figure out how do we become an AI native society here? How should we be automating this? This actually, again, it plays to our strengths. Once you start decoupling the economy from the headcount of the economy, well, isn't it great to be a small country, at that point, living in a beautiful place? Because in theory, it shouldn't be a limit that we're only 5.5 million people. It should actually be that we could operate like we were 30 million people or 50 million people in terms of outputs if we choose to lean into it.
The key throughput there is we're just not having the right conversation, and there are still important conversations that we should be having. I'm not going to diminish the value of those, but we're barely even having the discussion when it comes to AI, which I know the AI Forum is doing a really good job of bringing people together. And that's symptomatic. You see it in their surveys, right? They, I think, interviewed 200 companies across the country, and 80% of them had adopted AI or some, really strong stat. But you think about the sample size of those actually taking the survey, that is not reflective of the broader population and the small businesses that make up the majority of our country. So yeah, there's a lot that we need to do at the top end from a leadership standpoint and governance standpoint. Well,
We
JD,
should, well, sorry, I was just going to say, we should also qualify what stage. There's a difference between I'm providing ChatGPT to everybody and we're deploying agents to doing things. And there's going to be levels after that when it becomes swarms of agents and all of that sort of stuff. So we should have a maturity model that kind of says where are we all at and how are we going with that. So
absolutely. Everyone's definition of AI use is different, which is not what we need or not what we want. Awesome. Well, hey, thank you so much for sticking with it, JD. That was a fascinating conversation across history and how AI is proliferating across the country and within your business, and how you see it moving forward more broadly, and what we need to do from the leadership down. Would love to go through a 5 question quick fire round if that works for you.
it certainly does.
All right, let's kick it off. ChatGPT, Claude, or Gemini?
Today, Gemini, but I still have some feelings for Claude.
Would you rather be building and selling in Europe or the US, taking into account their regulatory environment?
The US.
It seems to be a no-brainer for everyone. I'm yet to have someone say Europe. Most overhyped AI trend right now.
It's a good question. I do think there's a lot of there is a lot of hype, which leads to the inevitable problem of, it's not there. You know, we've talked a lot about job loss here. I don't think that we haven't fallen off that cliff yet. So anybody that's sort of hardcore pushing that this is heavily happening, like even my Microsoft example earlier, that's 2%. It's not
Mm.
Microsoft is ginormous, but it's like that is just starting, and so I think that's why my message I hope is coming through is more like get on as a, now, rather than being too scary today, but I think it's about to get going.
We're talking a lot about the problem, but not enough about solutions or ways to fix it.
Yeah.
Open source models or closed?
I like open source models. Yeah.
Excellent. As a tech native, internet native, I can see that coming through.
Yeah.
One New Zealand company that is quietly doing great AI work that not many people know about.
Well, there's actually a few around. I'm keeping an eye on a few down here. Like there's Shire that doing stuff for property managers. Andrew Butel has started a new AI business helping customers maintain their software systems down here as well. There's Arcanum doing some cool stuff. I think this kind of goes back to I think as the market starts to adopt, these companies are absolutely just going to have tailwinds behind them. So I feel like most of them are a little bit below the radar right now as they come online.
Building in stealth. Good on them. Well, hey, thank you so much for joining us today, JD. It was a fascinating conversation. Can't wait to share it. And to our listeners, please subscribe to the channel for weekly episodes and to hear more from the people building New Zealand's AI future. Until next time, thanks for tuning in to the AI Corner.